If you agree that vigilance matters more than rank, like and subscribe, because sometimes the smallest flicker on a forgotten screen carries the weight of lives. And this story begins not with gunfire or medals, but with a young woman no one expected to matter. Specialist Claire Ramirez, 27 years old, stationed at a remote mountain outpost where fog swallowed the hills and boredom dulled even the sharpest eyes. And yet she stayed alert, because she had learned long ago that the world never announces danger with a trumpet. It whispers in details everyone else ignores. Claire's post was the sensor room, a narrow chamber lined with outdated monitors and blinking panels that recruits called the graveyard, because nothing ever happened there except static and paperwork. The other soldiers mocked her diligence, rolling their eyes when she carried her battered notebook everywhere, scribbling times, anomalies, wind shifts, even how birds altered flight patterns near the perimeter fence. Checklist Queen, they called her, smirking as if attention to detail were a weakness, not a strength. Claire never argued back. She just tightened the bun in her dark hair, sipped her cold coffee, and logged another observation in neat, deliberate handwriting. And then one storm-heavy night, the hum of the old generator mixing with rain hammering the tin roof, she saw it. On grid sector 4C, a faint pulse, almost imperceptible, like the sensor hiccuped and corrected itself. Every other operator would have dismissed it as static. Claire leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She replayed the feed, slowed it, checked the calibration, and there it was again. A flicker, half a second long, where the system went blind. She wrote it down. Time, coordinates, duration, and whispered to herself, that wasn't noise. The next morning, she filed an anomaly report. Her commanding officer, a captain barely older than her, didn't even glance at the details. Phantom interference, he muttered, signing it off and tossing it onto a pile of unread papers. Claire stood there for a moment, wanting to argue, then closed her mouth and walked away. She'd been here before, dismissed, unheard, told she was overthinking. But she remembered her father's voice, a veteran himself, telling her as a child, patterns don't lie, Mija. People do. That night, she checked again. Same sector, same time window, another flicker. She logged it, circled it, and drew a line across her notebook where the anomalies stacked like rungs on a ladder. Something, or someone, was testing their perimeter, finding the seams. She tried to tell the watch sergeant, who chuckled and said, Ramirez, if ghosts are invading, we'll light candles. Laughter followed. Claire went quiet again, but her eyes never left the screens. For a week, the pattern grew stronger. Faint blips on multiple grids, like a hand probing the fence line in calculated intervals. Others dismissed it as weather interference. But Claire knew storms didn't move in perfect sequences, didn't time themselves down to the minute. Her pen scratched late into the night, her notebook filling with grids and arrows. The younger soldiers teased her even harder. Maybe she's writing a novel, one quipped, passing her in the hall. Ramirez and the case of the phantom squirrels. She ignored them, because deep down she felt it. That low hum in her chest veterans call the sixth sense, the awareness that something was moving in silence just beyond sight. One evening, during chow, she overheard two lieutenants joking that Ramirez probably still believed satellites ran on batteries. She didn't look up from her tray, just folded the notebook closed, but inside, frustration mixed with certainty. If she was wrong, fine, she'd be a footnote. But if she was right, no one on this base understood how close they were to being blind. Days later, the storm returned, heavier, darker, thunder shaking the outpost windows. Claire sat alone in the monitoring room when the flicker came. Again, but this time not one sector, not two, 7 at once, cascading like dominoes. Her breath caught. This wasn't interference. It was mapping. Someone out there was pressing against their surveillance net, watching how it bent, measuring where it broke. She grabbed her radio. Command, this is Ramirez and sensors. We've got a coordinated anomaly. Recommend alerting patrols to Sector 4 through 10. Silence. Then the captain's voice, flat and dismissive. Negative, Ramirez. Phantom noise again. Don't wake people over raccoons. Static swallowed the channel. She slammed the radio down, fury flashing across her usually calm face. But she didn't stop. She recalibrated the sensors manually, cross-checking them against weather data, satellite drift, even the shift schedule of the nearby patrols. Her eyes burned from the screen's glow, but her hand kept moving across the notebook, lines and times and arrows forming a picture no one else wanted to see. Midnight passed. Rain battered the roof. Claire rubbed her eyes, then froze. The sensors spiked again, not flickering, but blacking out completely for 3 full seconds across the southeast quadrant. Her heart pounded. She leaned into the microphone. Possible breach, grid southeast, recommend immediate sweep. Silence again, then laughter through the radio. Ramirez, go to sleep. You're chasing ghosts. She gritted her teeth. But when the comms fell quiet, she grabbed her jacket, flashlight, and sidearm, and signed out for a maintenance walk. The rain soaked her within minutes, mud sucking at her boots as she crossed the perimeter fence line. She crouched near the drainage culvert, and there it was, footprints. Not boots. Civilian, heavy, fresh. 2 sets, side by side. Claire snapped a photo, her hands trembling, and shoved the evidence into her notebook. By the time she returned, soaked to the bone, no one cared to listen. But the next day, during a blackout that lasted 13 minutes, the entire outpost went blind. Alarms dead, cameras frozen, gates jammed. Officers shouted in panic. Soldiers stumbled for flashlights. And in the chaos, Claire was already on her feet, notebook in hand, calling out grid numbers. Her voice steady despite the storm. They're here. Southeast approach. Moving in pairs. Still, no one believed her. Until the patrol stumbled across the broken latch she'd marked the night before, sensors cut with surgical precision. Whispers spread like fire through the barracks. Ramirez called it. Ramirez knew. The officers tried to cover it up, chalk it to weather interference. But in the monitoring room, where Claire stood dripping rain onto the floor, she whispered the words that would soon echo far beyond the outpost. This isn't noise. It's an attack map. And though the command still laughed, the truth had already taken root. 1 line in her notebook at a time, leading toward the night a general would arrive and say words that would silence every smirk in that building. Vortex lantern, mobilize patrol. What happened after Claire Ramirez's warnings were ignored turned a quiet mountain outpost into the stage for a reckoning no one there would ever forget. The storm outside was brutal, rain lashing sideways against corrugated walls, wind howling through the ridges, the kind of storm soldiers dismissed with jokes about wet socks and bad coffee. But Claire knew storms didn't always just mean weather. They meant cover. They meant noise. They meant a cloak for those who knew how to use them. While officers barked at each other in frustration over the 13-minute blackout that had swallowed their defenses, Claire sat in her dim booth flipping through her notebook, the soaked pages smudged from the night before, but still legible. Every arrow and timestamp forming a pattern that told a story no one wanted to hear. The captain stormed in, accusing her of inciting panic, waving her logs in the air like they were scribbles instead of warnings. But she pointed to the times with a finger that didn't tremble, her voice calm but sharp. They're probing us, sir, and if you don't act, they'll walk through your front door. His glare burned red, his dismissal louder than his fear, and when he left, slamming the door behind him, the silence he left behind felt heavier than thunder. That night, she spotted it again, not just on her screens but outside her window, a faint glow moving through the tree line, weaving in and out before vanishing. And when she checked the clock, her breath caught. It was 2:17, the same minute as the last blackout. She radioed it in, steady voice despite the pounding in her chest. Unknown movement southeast. Not wildlife. Possible recon. The channel answered with static, then Sergeant Vaughn's lazy drawl, mocking. Copy that, Ramirez. Bigfoot confirmed. Laughter followed. She shut the radio off. Alone, again, but not defeated, she leaned closer to her monitors, her pencil tracing the blips like a cartographer mapping a coastline. And what emerged was undeniable. A map, not noise, a hand pressing against the fence line with deliberate patience. She stayed awake long after the others gave up, her pen carving grooves into paper until her hand cramped, because something inside her, the same instinct that had kept her father alive through his tours, whispered that the window was closing. Dawn came, and with it, the mess hall whispers. Soldiers chuckled about Ramirez chasing ghosts, about her flashlight patrol in the ring. Here comes the ghost hunter, someone said. clapping mockingly when she walked in. She didn't flinch, didn't give them the satisfaction, just folded her notebook, closed, and ate in silence. But their laughter was thinner now, cracked by unease, because even jokes couldn't erase the footprints the patrol had stumbled on in the mud. Command scheduled a drill to reassure the base, set for 3 a.m. in another storm. But Claire's pulse quickened because drills don't hide in thunder, drills don't sync perfectly with the timing she'd logged. When the alarms screamed that night, red lights flashing, boots hitting the floor, she didn't think exercise. She thought pattern. She thought breach. She sprinted to her monitors, ignoring officers yelling for her to form up, and watched in horror as the sensors went blind again, not in one place, but cascading in waves like falling dominoes. She grabbed her mic, voice firm. This isn't a drill. Breach confirmed, multiple sectors, full lockdown recommended. No one listened. Chaos drowned her words. Soldiers stumbled half-dressed. Officers screamed to cover their own confusion. Outside, in the slashing rain, two figures slipped through the fence, quick and precise, and Claire's eyes tracked them across the blind zones with a cold clarity. She logged their path, circled the sector, marked their timing. Her breath was steady even as adrenaline roared. She radioed again, louder. Grid southeast. 2 hostiles moving west, now. Dismissed again. But when the patrol returned pale-faced, mud streaking their uniforms, admitting the fence had been cut, silence swallowed the room. The captain, stubborn as stone, claimed it was local hunters, a trivial mistake, but the whispers had already shifted. Soldiers glanced at Claire now with unease instead of laughter. In the days that followed, cadets and recruits snuck glances at her notebook, whispering about the way every line matched their shifts, their sightings, their unease. One private, barely out of training, asked her quietly if she was right. She met his eyes, steady and calm. Every hour we waste makes us weaker. That night, lightning split the sky, rain like bullets against metal. And when the blackout came, it wasn't seconds, it wasn't 13 minutes, it was 20, the longest yet. Radios sputtered, officers shouted, boots thundered, but Claire moved differently. She bypassed the shouting, sprinted to the main control panel, flipped breakers by hand, and slowly forced the system awake. Screens blinked back, not whole, not clean, but enough to see what was happening. Gaps everywhere, holes in the perimeter like open doors. And then she saw it, a beacon pulsing faint on her southeast grid, not weather, not wildlife, but deliberate, a marker for something larger. Her throat went dry. She whispered to herself, "They're staging." Her pencil circled it 3 times, underlined once. Not a drill. Soldiers poured into the room then, panicked, demanding answers, voices shrill with fear, but she just pointed at the screens. "Look, they're walking us into a trap." Some stared blankly, others shook their heads, denial cracking in their eyes. And then the comms crackled alive, but it wasn't her captain's voice, or Vaughn's, or anyone she'd ever heard on their chain of command. It was sharp, deliberate, commanding, a voice that cut the storm in half. "Report anomalies." Who logged them first? The room froze. Claire raised her hand slowly, water dripping from her sleeve onto the floor, her notebook clutched to her chest. Soldiers turned, some with disbelief, some with shame, because for weeks they had mocked the one person who had seen the truth. The voice on the other and didn't hesitate. "Hold position. Do not dismiss her reports. Elevate protocol immediately." The words landed like thunder. Officers looked at each other, pale, the phrase, "elevate protocol," stirring whispers because it was reserved for only the most serious threats, protocols they'd heard about, but never expected to live. Claire didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just whispered to herself, steady and sure. Finally, and outside, the storm raged on, as if it knew the world had just shifted, as if it knew something far larger was now moving into place. When Specialist Claire Ramirez stood in that dim sensor room soaked from rain, notebook clutched to her chest, and a general's voice crackled over the comms asking for her name, the entire outpost shifted from laughter to silence, and the reckoning that followed was something no soldier stationed there would ever forget. Hours later, long before dawn, headlights cut through the mountain fog, a convoy grinding up the soaked dirt road, tires spitting mud as soldiers scrambled to formation, nerves tight, because generals don't drive out to forgotten posts for phantom noise, They come for threats. And everyone knew then that Ramirez had been right all along. The air was thick with unease, boots snapping to attention, rain still dripping off helmets as the four-star stepped out, coat pulled tight, eyes like iron scanning the trembling line of officers before brushing past them without a word, heading straight to the monitoring room. Soldiers whispered behind stiffened backs, some ashamed, some still too stubborn to admit their laughter had cost them more than pride. Claire stood waiting, posture straight despite exhaustion, her notebook on the desk, open to the circled coordinates and sketches she'd drawn in long, sleepless nights. The general's boots echoed on the metal floor as he entered, his presence alone enough to shrink the room, and he looked not at the captain, not at the shouting officers, but directly at Claire. "You're Ramirez?" he asked, voice low, steady. She nodded once, meeting his gaze without fear. He picked up her notebook, flipping through the pages silently, each arrow, each timestamp, each meticulous logbook entry, the storm outside punctuating the silence with thunder. After a long pause, he set it down and spoke words that froze the room. Vortex lantern. Mobilize patrol. Gasps rippled through the officers. Classified. Whispered protocol, something they'd only heard about in rumor, the kind of phrase locked in training manuals most would never touch. Soldiers straightened, whispers of Vortex lantern spreading like wildfire, because it meant one thing. This wasn't just a breach. It was a hostile infiltration of the highest order, and the only reason they were aware of it at all was because Ramirez had refused to stay silent. The captain stammered, trying to save face, mumbling excuses about miscommunication, but the general cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice steel. "You dismissed her?" he asked, voice cold. The captain opened his mouth, then closed it. The general turned back to Claire. "Specialist, walk me through your findings." She stepped forward, calm, flipping through the notebook she had been mocked for, tracing the lines with her pen, explaining how the anomalies formed a timed sequence, how the infiltrators had used storms as cover, how their blackouts weren't failures but rehearsals. Her voice never wavered, her eyes fixed on the map she'd built alone while the rest of the base laughed. The general listened in silence, nodding once when she finished. Then he looked up, scanning the room, his voice sharp and final. "This specialist saw what the rest of you refused to. She saved your lives, and you'll remember that." Shame rippled across the faces of officers and recruits alike, the weight of their laughter crashing down harder than the rain outside. That night, under direct orders, the base went into full lockdown, patrols deployed exactly where Ramirez's logs had predicted, floodlights slicing through the storm. Hours later, movement was caught, dark figures at the perimeter, slipping into what they thought were blind zones. But this time, patrols were waiting. Shouts erupted, gunfire cracked, and in the chaos, infiltrators scattered, their surprise burned away by the fact that one specialist notebook had undone weeks of planning. By dawn, the fence was reinforced, evidence collected, infiltrators driven off, and the base stood intact not because of rank, not because of command, but because of the vigilance of a 27-year-old woman whose eyes never left the details others ignored. In the debrief, the general addressed the outpost personally, his words heavy, deliberate. "Specialist Ramirez is the reason you're standing here. Vigilance is leadership, even when no one salutes it. Remember that the next time arrogance tempts you to ignore quiet voices." Soldiers who once mocked her now avoided her eyes, some too ashamed to speak, others whispering her name with a new respect. The captain was reassigned within the week. And Claire Ramirez, the checklist queen, the ghost hunter, the one mocked for scribbling in a logbook, became the soldier whose vigilance rewrote the outpost's history. She didn't seek recognition, didn't bask in her vindication. Instead, she returned to her booth, opened a fresh page in her notebook, and began logging again, because patterns never stop, and storms always come back. The logbook itself, the one that once drew laughter, was sealed into the operations archive as classified evidence, its pages now carrying weight far heavier than ink. In the quiet that followed, Claire sat alone, sipping stale coffee, eyes on the monitors, the storm easing into dawn. She thought of her father's voice, that old mantra etched into her bones. "Patterns don't lie, Mija. People do." She smiled faintly, not for recognition, but for the truth of it. Outside, The base buzzed with new discipline, soldiers double-checking every system, patrols sharper, eyes clearer, as if the storm had burned away their arrogance. And yet, in the quiet corners, whispers still carried her name, some in awe, some in guilt, all in acknowledgement that the one they had dismissed had stood unshaken when it mattered most. History didn't remember the laughter, the nicknames, the ridicule. It remembered the night the general himself confirmed her vigilance with a phrase few would ever hear: Vortex lantern, Mobilize patrol. And so the story ends not with fanfare, not with medals, but with a young woman back at her post, notebook open, eyes on the horizon, ready for the next flicker no one else would see until it was too late.